6 a.m. Coffee still steaming. I walk outside and my Jeep is gone, vanished like my faith in suburban living. But this wasn't some tweaker looking for catalytic converters. This was something far more infuriating. There's Dolores Crenshaw on my security footage, 2 a.m. sharp, directing a tow truck like she's conducting a symphony of suburban tyranny. You can practically smell her cheap floral perfume through the screen as she points at my vehicle with those blood-red talons. The bolt cutters glint under the streetlight, still warm from cutting through my lock. Her little love note flutters in the morning breeze. Unauthorized vehicle modifications violate Section 12.3b. Vehicle impounded pending compliance review. Management. The sound of that paper crinkling makes my blood boil even now. Here's what this power-drunk HOA queen didn't realize. She just committed a federal crime against a federal agent. Those modifications, government equipment, and me, I don't back down. What would you do if your HOA president literally stole your car while you slept? Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA tyrant like this. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this suburban nightmare. Name's Marcus Steele, 34, and I'm a federal wildlife crime investigator. Yeah, that's a real job. Think poachers, exotic animal smugglers, the kind of people who think a Bengal tiger makes a great backyard pet. My assignment brought me to Pinewood Estates, Colorado, where I was tracking an illegal wildlife trafficking ring that had been operating under everyone's noses for months. Pinewood Estates, 200 cookie-cutter homes, median price $400K, where every mailbox is regulation beige and the grass gets measured with actual rulers. The smell of chemical fertilizer hangs in the air like a toxic cloud, mixed with the sound of leaf blowers that start promptly at 7 a.m. every Tuesday. It's the kind of place where conformity isn't just expected. It's enforced with the passion of a homecoming committee planning prom. My government-issued Jeep was perfect cover. Looked like any other weekend Warriors ride, except for the hidden antennas, reinforced bumpers, and GPS tracking equipment that could track a smuggler across 3 states. The modifications were subtle but necessary. This wasn't just transportation, it was a mobile command center disguised as a suburban dad mobile. Enter Dolores Crenshaw, 60, bleached blonde, drives a white BMW X5 that she washes twice a week like it's a sacred ritual. Former real estate agent who got divorced and channeled all that rage into becoming the HOA president from hell. She lives in the corner lot mansion, biggest house in the development, and treats the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. The texture of her perfectly manicured lawn feels like AstroTurf under your feet, maintained by a crew that shows up every Thursday at exactly 9 a.m. with military precision. Week 1, she shows up with a welcome basket and a 47-page HOA rulebook bound in plastic. The pages crinkle with that fresh printed smell that screams legal document designed to make your life miserable. Week 2, I get a written warning about my Jeep's aggressive appearance. Apparently, all-terrain tires are somehow threatening to property values. Week 3, she's complaining about my suspicious work schedule because I leave at odd hours for federal assignments. Being a reasonable guy, I tried the diplomatic approach. Showed up to the HOA meeting, explained I traveled for work, even brought donuts, the good ones from that fancy place downtown, not grocery store garbage. The community center smelled like burnt coffee and disappointment while Dolores sat at the head table like she was presiding over the Supreme Court. 3 other board members, a retired accountant who nodded at everything she said, a yoga instructor who seemed perpetually confused, and an insurance salesman who kept checking his phone like he was expecting a call from someone more important. But here's where things got personal. At the community barbecue, Dolores tried her flirtation routine, the kind of aggressive friendliness that feels like a spider wrapping you in silk. When I politely deflected her advances and focused on the investigation instead of her attention-seeking behavior, something shifted. The smell of charcoal smoke couldn't mask the stench of her wounded ego. She started studying my Jeep like a detective on a cop show. Commercial-grade tires, unusual antenna placement, equipment she couldn't identify but knew didn't belong in her pristine suburban fantasy. That's when she decided I was the enemy. I remember thinking back to my federal training about civilian interference, how HOA boards can't actually override federal agency vehicle requirements due to constitutional supremacy. Federal law always trumps local regulations, but clearly nobody had explained constitutional law to Queen Dolores. The formal complaint came next. My vehicle violated residential aesthetic standards and was incompatible with community values. She produced photos that showed my Jeep parked allegedly over property lines, photos that were clearly manipulated, measuring tape conveniently positioned to suggest violations that didn't exist. The audacity was almost impressive. The emergency board meeting was a kangaroo court with all the legal authority of a kindergarten mock trial. 3 votes to 1 for daily $200 fines until I achieved compliance. The yoga instructor was the only dissenting vote, God bless her chakras. Dolores sat there with that satisfied smirk, probably already calculating how much money she'd squeeze out of this manufactured crisis. What she didn't know was that every interaction was being documented, every illegal move was being recorded, and every day she dug herself deeper into a federal case that would eventually destroy everything she thought she controlled. Dolores didn't waste time turning her personal vendetta into official HOA business. 2 days after I politely declined her barbecue advances, she called an emergency board meeting with the urgency of someone reporting a terrorist attack, except the only thing under attack was her bruised ego. The meeting happened in her oversized living room, all cream-colored furniture and the kind of aggressive vanilla air freshener that burns your nostrils from 20 feet away. She'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation titled Community Standards Enforcement, because nothing says unhinged HOA president like weaponizing Microsoft Office at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. Harold, the retired accountant, sat there nodding like a dashboard bobblehead, while Namaste Nancy looked like she'd rather be getting a root canal. Pete, the insurance salesman, was so glued to his phone, I wondered if he was actually attending a different meeting via FaceTime. Marcus Steele's vehicle, Dolores announced, clicking through photos she'd clearly taken while skulking around my building like some suburban paparazzi, represents a clear violation of our residential aesthetic standards. The dramatic pause was so long I could hear the central air conditioning cycling on. She doctored those photos with the subtlety of a B-movie special effect. Parking lines that existed only in her imagination, measurements that defied basic physics, camera angles that would make Salvador Dali proud. According to her evidence, my Jeep was parked 6 inches over the property line, except that property line was actually someone else's driveway. It was like watching someone try to prove gravity works backward using interpretive dance. Furthermore, she continued, building to what she clearly thought was her Perry Mason moment, this intimidating military-style vehicle decreases property values and threatens community safety. Harold's enthusiastic nodding created a small breeze. The board voted 3-1 for daily $200 fines until I achieved compliance. Democracy in action, ladies and gentlemen. When I reviewed the HOA covenants with my federal legal team, yes, we have an entire department for civilian interference because this happens more than you'd think. The exemption clause was crystal clear. Vehicles modified for professional purposes were specifically protected if properly registered. My registration stated federal agency use in official government typography that's harder to fake than monopoly money. I played it by the book, requested a formal hearing, submitted federal documentation, brought Lieutenant Rodriguez as my character witness. Rodriguez is a 20-year veteran who looks like he bench presses motorcycles for fun, the kind of guy who makes hardened criminals voluntarily confess their childhood fears. The hearing was in that same vanilla-scented living room, now enhanced with lavender candles that could probably be detected by satellites. I presented my case methodically: federal registration, professional exemption clause, constitutional supremacy doctrine. Rodriguez explained how the vehicle tracked endangered species smugglers, how the equipment had helped bust international trafficking rings worth millions. But Dolores was ready with her nuclear option. How do we know these credentials aren't fake? She demanded, examining Rodriguez's federal ID like she was a forensic handwriting expert. He could be a drug dealer with sophisticated forgeries. These people can fake anything these days. The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. That phrase, "these people," hung in the air like toxic gas. Other residents suddenly found their shoes fascinating. The whisper campaign had begun before I even realized what was happening. Harold, Pete, and even poor Nancy sided with Dolores. "Better safe than sorry," Harold mumbled, probably calculating how this drama might affect his property resale value. The fine stood, $200 daily for the crime of owning functional transportation. 12 days later, I got hit with a $2,400 bill. But here's where my federal training kicked in. When civilians try to scam you, always follow the money. I ran background checks on the whole board, standard procedure for potential security threats. Plot twist: Dolores owned 30% of Rapid Recovery Towing through her brother-in-law Danny Crenshaw. Every problem vehicle she had towed earned her a cut of the impound fees, storage charges, and administrative costs. This wasn't community enforcement. This was a small-time extortion racket wearing a pearl necklace and calling itself civic duty. The neighborhood was fracturing. Team Dolores attracted the conflict-averse and the genuinely gullible. Team Marcus was smaller but growing, led by Frank, an 82-year-old Vietnam vet who recognized fascism when it wore suburban camouflage. He started leaving supportive notes under my door, written in the careful cursive of someone who learned penmanship when it actually mattered. Meanwhile, Dolores launched her social media blitz, cryptic Facebook posts about dangerous federal claims and suspicious newcomers threatening family safety. She was building a narrative where I was the neighborhood predator and she was the brave mom protecting everyone's children. I let her dig deeper. Every illegal move documented, every discriminatory comment recorded. In federal law enforcement, we have a golden rule: never interrupt your enemy when they're committing felonies. Dolores was committing so many felonies she could have opened her own crime academy. Dolores wasn't satisfied with just bleeding me dry financially. She wanted total destruction. 2 weeks after her kangaroo court victory, she hired Rick Sampson, a private investigator who looked like he'd been rejected from mall security for excessive use of cologne. The guy reeked of desperation and Axe body spray, following me around with the subtlety of a marching band. Rick's mission? Dig up dirt that would justify Dolores's holy war. What he discovered was my actual federal work, tracking endangered species smugglers, exotic pet trafficking rings, international wildlife crime syndicates. But in Dolores's paranoid fantasy, this became, he brings dangerous felons to our family neighborhood. She launched a petition claiming I was a clear and present danger, collecting 67 signatures from neighbors who probably thought due process was a plumbing term. Time for my own investigation. Federal databases make Google look like a children's picture book, and Dolores's background read like a criminal resume. Real estate license suspended twice in Arizona for ethical violations, which sounds better than lying to clients about termite damage and foundation cracks. Even better, she'd embezzled $12,000 from her previous HOA in Phoenix before fleeing to Colorado like some suburban fugitive. Her current operation, Sunshine Property Management, lacked proper bonding and insurance, basically operating illegally while collecting fees from 200 families. It's like discovering your dentist never went to dental school but charges you anyway for root canals. The nuclear option came while I was tracking smugglers through Nevada on a 3-day federal assignment. I returned home to find my driveway empty, bolt cutters glinting under streetlights next to my severed padlock chain. The metallic taste of pure rage flooded my mouth as the reality hit. Dolores had actually stolen federal government property. Security footage showed her at 2 a.m., pearl necklace gleaming like armor, directing her brother-in-law Danny's tow truck with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. She'd cut through my lock, federal property, committing a crime that carries minimum $10,000 fines plus jail time. But Dolores was too drunk on suburban power to consider that actions have federal consequences. My Jeep sat in an impound lot that smelled like motor oil and broken dreams, 40 miles away and racking up $150 daily storage fees. Chain link fence topped with razor wire surrounded rows of vehicles like automotive prisoners of war, all generating revenue for Danny's towing empire. Here's where federal training beats suburban drama. I could have slapped handcuffs on Dolores immediately, but sometimes you catch sharks by letting minnows swim around and incriminate themselves. My gut said Dolores was running a bigger con, targeting multiple homeowners with fabricated violations. Bingo. Within days, other neighbors started receiving violation notices for increasingly absurd infractions. Tom down the street got hit with a $500 fine for unauthorized marine vessel storage, his fishing boat that had been legally parked for 6 years. The Martinez family faced immediate towing threats for their RV, despite having grandfathered parking rights older than Dolores's fake blonde hair. The pattern crystallized. Dolores targeted anyone who questioned her authority or owned something worth towing. This wasn't community improvement. This was organized theft dressed up in HOA bylaws and wrapped in a bow of fake civic concern. Then fate delivered Janet Kowalski, forensic accountant, and my neighbor 3 doors down. Janet approached me like a resistance fighter making contact, whispering that HOA financial statements smelled fishier than a seafood truck in Arizona heat. Dolores had fined Janet $300 for planting non-conforming rose bushes. Apparently, pink roses violated some color palette that existed only in Dolores's delusional mind. Janet's preliminary audit revealed a financial house of cards, missing funds, duplicate vendor payments, expense categories that read like bad fiction, emergency landscape maintenance during January snowstorms, security consultations that produced no visible security improvements, administrative fees flowing directly into accounts Dolores controlled like her personal piggy bank. Lieutenant Rodriguez got involved when government property theft crossed his desk. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit started salivating at mentions of systematic HOA embezzlement. Federal agencies love cases where criminals create their own evidence trails. Headquarters made the call: continue the undercover operation. Dolores had committed federal crimes against a federal agent while apparently running a multi-year fraud scheme. She'd stepped on a landmine disguised as perfectly manicured suburban grass, but the community pressure intensified daily. Neighbors received legal threats for supporting me. Dolores warned contractors not to work with troublemakers, turning basic home maintenance into political warfare. She was weaponizing systems designed to protect homeowners, using HOA bylaws like legal clubs against anyone questioning her authority. I documented everything with federal precision: every threat, every illegal fine, every abuse of power. Prosecutors love defendants who build cases against themselves, and Dolores was constructing a legal fortress that would become her own prison. The irony was beautiful. She thought she was untouchable, protected by suburban anonymity and municipal indifference. What she didn't realize was that federal agents never forget, never forgive, and never stop documenting evidence. Dolores was about to learn the difference between neighborhood drama and federal consequences. Dolores was spiraling into full-blown paranoid desperation, and cornered animals are always the most dangerous. When Rick's investigation revealed my federal communications equipment, she panicked like someone who just realized they'd been poking a grizzly bear with a pool noodle. But instead of retreating like any rational human being, she doubled down with the fury of a woman whose entire identity depended on being the neighborhood's unquestioned dictator. Her first catastrophic mistake was attempting to access my impounded Jeep for additional evidence gathering. Danny's lot became her personal crime scene as she photographed sophisticated tracking equipment, encrypted radios, and GPS systems that screamed federal government property louder than a fire alarm. The security footage of her face when she realized this wasn't civilian gear. Pure terror mixed with the dawning understanding that she'd stepped into something way beyond suburban HOA drama. Meanwhile, Janet's forensic audit was uncovering financial crimes that would make white-collar prosecutors literally applaud. She'd traced $47,000 missing from HOA reserve funds, systematically funneled through emergency maintenance accounts that Dolores controlled like her personal Vegas jackpot. Fake invoices from Danny's shell companies, towing, landscaping, security consultations, created an evidence trail so obvious it was practically gift-wrapped for federal prosecutors. The beautiful thing about federal training is learning patience while building airtight cases. Every interaction with Dolores was recorded on devices she couldn't detect, couldn't identify, couldn't even imagine existed. Every illegal action documented with timestamp precision that would make Swiss watchmakers jealous. Every discriminatory comment preserved for civil rights prosecutors who dream about cases this clear-cut. Frank's garage meeting smelled like motor oil and brewing revolution when 23 families gathered to share their Dolores horror stories. The pattern that emerged was uglier than her artificial blonde roots: systematic targeting of anyone who didn't fit her vision of suburban white perfection. Tom revealed $20,300 in fabricated marine vessel violations. The Martinez family showed $8,900 in fake emergency repair bills for work never performed. But Mrs. Bennett's story hit me in the gut. $450 in fines for unauthorized cultural displays because her American flag was supposedly the wrong size. An 84-year-old naturalized citizen getting harassed for displaying the flag she'd waited decades to earn the right to fly. That's when this stopped being about my stolen Jeep and became about something much bigger. This was systematic discrimination dressed up in HOA bylaws, targeting veterans, minorities, and anyone who threatened Dolores's white suburban fantasy. Dolores escalated to hiring actual lawyers for intimidation lawsuits, threatening defamation claims against neighbors, and calling police to report me for trespassing while checking my own mailbox. The responding officers, who knew me from federal coordination meetings, basically told her to stop wasting taxpayer money on suburban drama therapy. But her nuclear option was hiring Rick to break into my apartment while I was supposedly out of town. Federal agents don't just have Ring doorbells. We have surveillance systems that record license plates, facial recognition, and audio from 3 blocks away. Rick's illegal entry triggered alerts that had FBI agents reviewing footage before he'd even finished picking my lock. When questioned by federal agents who don't appreciate civilian interference with ongoing investigations, Rick became more cooperative than a golden retriever. His confession revealed Dolores's exact instructions. Find anything that proves he's not really federal, basically admitting to conspiracy to obstruct justice while wearing pearls and righteousness. Janet's breakthrough came when she discovered Dolores's offshore banking in the Cayman Islands. $31,000 in laundered HOA funds earning interest in tropical paradise, while homeowners struggled with inflated fees. This wasn't just embezzlement. This was international money laundering that brought federal banking regulators into the mix. The discrimination pattern analysis revealed Dolores's true methodology. Hispanic families faced 340% more violations than white residents. Veterans received twice as many harassment notices. Single mothers got anonymous complaints about suspicious male visitors and inappropriate noise levels that existed only in Dolores's bigoted imagination. Frank's military intelligence background proved invaluable when he identified the private security firm Dolores hired to surveil my apartment. License traces revealed a company with criminal history involving illegal wiretapping and intimidation campaigns. Actual criminals hired to harass a federal agent investigating crimes. The walls were closing in from every direction. Local TV investigative reporters started calling after Frank reached out with veteran-to-veteran credibility. State housing authorities launched formal audits. IRS Criminal Division issued federal tax liens that destroyed Dolores's credit rating faster than her community reputation. When her lawyer withdrew representation citing irreconcilable ethical conflicts, I knew the endgame was approaching. Dolores was isolated, desperate, and making increasingly erratic decisions that would soon culminate in the kind of public meltdown that ends careers and creates federal precedents. The community was rallying. The evidence was overwhelming. The federal case was bulletproof. All that remained was giving Dolores enough rope to hang herself in front of the entire neighborhood and the media cameras that would soon be rolling. The bombshell that would obliterate Dolores's criminal empire came from the most unlikely source, Janet's obsessive spreadsheet analysis. While everyone focused on the dramatic federal crimes, Janet was dissecting HOA records with the methodical precision of a forensic pathologist examining evidence that reeked of financial decay. "Marcus," she whispered, sliding a manila folder across my kitchen table with trembling hands, "Dolores has been forging board meeting minutes for 8 months. Every vote that authorized your harassment, none of them actually happened." The documents hit like physical blows, meeting minutes dated when Harold was in Florida visiting grandchildren. Pete's signature authorizing expenditures during his Denver business trip. Nancy's recorded vote for measures she'd publicly opposed. The timestamps revealed meetings that occurred while board members were provably hundreds of miles away. Dolores hadn't just been abusing authority, she'd been operating with zero legal authority while forging Democratic approval for her criminal enterprise. Every fine, every towing order, every harassment campaign had been implemented through fabricated documentation that wouldn't fool a middle school civics class. But Janet's forensic deep dive uncovered something that made my federal training scream danger alerts. The insurance company had never authorized Dolores's property management contract. Sunshine Property Management was operating completely illegally, collecting fees from 200 families while lacking required bonding and insurance. Every contract was void. Every fee was theft. Every action was fraud on an industrial scale. The federal implications detonated in my brain like a tactical nuke. My Jeep contained classified tracking equipment for Operation Nightingale, an active 18-month investigation tracking endangered species smugglers across 3 states. Dolores's unauthorized access hadn't just compromised government property. She'd potentially blown federal operations worth millions in seized contraband and criminal arrests. Her private investigators' photographs included classified federal technology that foreign intelligence services would kill to obtain. What began as suburban pettiness had escalated into potential espionage charges, carrying life sentences in federal supermax facilities where terrorists spend their final decades. Rodriguez's emergency call confirmed my worst nightmare becoming prosecutorial paradise. "Marcus, that equipment she photographed connects to multi-agency task forces in Nevada, Utah, and New Mexico. Her interference may have compromised ongoing investigations tracking international wildlife trafficking rings worth $50 million. The charges were stacking like cordwood: theft of government property, espionage, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, racketeering, international money laundering. Dolores had accidentally declared war on the entire federal government while robbing her own neighbors blind. Janet's financial analysis revealed the HOA owed $31,000 in unpaid federal payroll taxes, while Dolores diverted funds to personal expenses: BMW lease payments, family vacations, credit card bills, all funded by homeowner fees, while federal tax obligations accumulated like compound interest on a bomb. The money laundering operation was breathtakingly stupid. $73,000 in fake vendor payments over 2 years, laundered through family shell companies, then transferred to Cayman Islands accounts earning tax-free interest. Dolores had created an international financial crime syndicate to steal grocery money from suburban families. The community rebellion exploded across social media. Pinewood Truth Facebook group reached 127 members documenting systematic abuse with photographic evidence, timestamp records, and witness statements. The disabled veterans $4,200 in accessibility harassment fines. The Martinez family's discriminatory targeting documentation. Mrs. Bennett's cultural persecution records. 3 board members resigned faster than rats, abandoning a sinking ship, suddenly discovering urgent needs to distance themselves from the woman they'd enabled for months. Harold, Pete, and Nancy faced potential conspiracy charges for rubber-stamping criminal activities. The U.S. Attorney's Office reached their decision with prosecutorial glee. Full RICO prosecution for operating a continuing criminal enterprise. Wire fraud, mail fraud, civil rights violations, theft of government property, obstruction of federal investigations, espionage, international money laundering. Dolores Crenshaw had managed to violate more federal laws than most organized crime families while wearing pearls and driving a BMW to steal from suburban homeowners. The federal government was about to introduce her to consequences that would make her previous life seem like paradise. My kitchen table became a war room that smelled like fresh coffee and brewing vengeance. The documents spread across the surface represented months of Dolores's crimes. Bank statements, forged minutes, discriminatory communications, evidence so damning it practically glowed with prosecutorial promise. The team assembled like suburban justice warriors with government backing. Lieutenant Rodriguez arrived carrying federal files thick enough to crush Dolores's dreams, followed by federal prosecutor Sarah Bennett, whose briefcase contained enough criminal charges to make organized crime bosses nervous. Janet spread financial evidence with the enthusiasm of someone who finds embezzlement personally offensive, while Frank brought tactical planning skills that had won actual wars against better-armed enemies. Attorney David Park joined our crusade partly from genuine outrage, partly because destroying property management criminals generates the kind of publicity that funds retirement dreams. The aroma of determination mixed with Colombian dark roast as we planned the systematic destruction of Dolores's criminal empire. "This isn't just about your Jeep anymore," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "Dolores violated so many laws she could teach criminal justice courses from prison." Sarah Bennett nodded with prosecutorial hunger that made my badge tingle with anticipation. Our master plan unfolded with military precision that would make generals proud. Phase 1 involved documenting every financial crime with forensic accounting that would impress Swiss bankers. Janet's audit revealed Dolores's systematic theft, the $23,000 boat purchased with HOA funds, property management fees doubled without authorization, $31,000 in phantom repairs that existed only in her imagination, and fabricated invoices. Phase 2 focused on legitimate HOA reconstruction through democratic elections that would restore community control. Frank's experience organizing military logistics translated perfectly to civilian operations. We identified replacement candidates who actually cared about homeowner welfare. Maria Santos, the elementary teacher who understood budgets, Robert Kim, the nurse who grasped ethical obligations, Patricia Williams, the small business owner who knew real financial management. The psychological warfare component was beautifully simple. We'd request a final hearing on my vehicle dispute, ensuring maximum witness attendance through social media coordination, local TV news, HOA abuse bloggers, community newspapers. Everyone would watch Dolores lie under oath about federal credentials while cameras captured perjury charges that would enhance her prison sentence. Phase 3 involved public revelation with theatrical timing that would make Broadway directors jealous. Federal marshals positioned for coordinated arrests, IRS agents ready for asset seizure, state regulators prepared for license revocations. The community would witness justice unfold in real time while media documented the fall of suburban tyranny. Sarah Bennett explained a legal strategy with enthusiasm that made courtroom drama seem boring by comparison. 12 counts wire fraud, 8 counts mail fraud, civil rights violations, RICO charges for operating continuing criminal enterprises. The beauty of RICO prosecution meant triple damage awards. Dolores would owe nearly $500,000 in restitution to families she'd terrorized. "Here's something most people don't realize," Bennett continued, leaning forward with prosecutorial excitement. RICO laws were designed for organized crime, but they apply perfectly to systematic HOA embezzlement involving mail and wire fraud. Your neighbor created a criminal enterprise that qualifies for the same prosecution tools we use against the mafia. Community organizing leveraged social media with revolutionary efficiency. The Pinewood Reform Coalition grew to 127 homeowners sharing evidence through encrypted messaging apps that would make resistance fighters proud. 47 families documented harassment with timestamps, photographs, and witness statements, creating an evidence mountain that would crush any defense attorney's hopes. Frank's tactical preparation included surveillance countermeasures, coordinated federal arrests, and media management that would control narrative flow. In military operations, he explained while reviewing floor plans, timing determines victory. We hit simultaneously from multiple directions: legal, financial, regulatory, and community pressure. Dolores won't know which crisis to address first. The educational component reflected my commitment to preventing future abuse. Federal HOA reform legislation needed precedent cases like Dolores's prosecution. Grant opportunities for legal aid organizations could protect vulnerable homeowners nationwide. Partnership with state housing authorities would create oversight mechanisms that could identify criminal property management before families suffered financial devastation. David Park's research revealed Fair Housing Act violations in Dolores's systematic targeting of minorities, veterans, and elderly residents. Selective enforcement based on protected characteristics isn't just discrimination, he explained with legal precision that made constitutional violations sound personal. It's federal civil rights crimes carrying additional penalties that extend prison sentences and increase restitution obligations. Janet's forensic expertise uncovered international money laundering through Cayman Islands accounts that brought federal banking regulators into prosecution coordination. Financial crimes cross state lines, she noted with accounting enthusiasm that made spreadsheets sound dangerous. International transfers trigger federal jurisdiction that makes local HOA disputes into federal cases with decades of prison exposure. The coordination was perfect. Evidence was overwhelming. Community support was unanimous. Media attention was guaranteed. Federal prosecutors were ready to make examples that would terrify property management criminals nationwide. All that remained was giving Dolores enough rope to hang herself publicly while cameras rolled and federal agents waited with handcuffs. Her empire's spectacular collapse would be appointment television. Dolores was unraveling faster than cheap sweater, and desperation was making her dangerous in ways that would have impressed mob bosses. When she realized the federal investigation was closing in like a steel trap, she launched a scorched earth campaign that proved she'd rather burn the entire neighborhood down than admit defeat. Her first move was filing false police reports claiming I'd threatened her with federal retaliation and government harassment. The responding officers, who knew me from federal coordination meetings, listened to her rambling accusations with the patience of saints before explaining that federal agents don't threaten civilians, they arrest them. The smell of her desperation was so thick you could taste it, mixed with the cheap perfume she wore like armor against reality. Next came the crisis management firm she hired with stolen HOA funds, slick PR professionals who specialized in making criminals look like victims. Their first strategy was rebranding Dolores as a concerned community leader fighting government overreach, which would have been hilarious if it weren't funded by money stolen from the very neighbors she was terrorizing. The sabotage campaign escalated to psychological warfare that would make dictators proud. Anonymous flyers appeared overnight claiming I was a deep-cover drug dealer using federal credentials. Fake Yelp reviews attacked neighbors who supported me, targeting their businesses with fabricated complaints about unprofessional conduct and suspicious activities. She was weaponizing the internet like a suburban cyber terrorist. But her nuclear option was attempting to get me fired by contacting my federal agency with detailed complaints about abuse of authority and misuse of government resources. What she didn't realize was that every call was recorded, every complaint documented, and every false accusation added another federal charge to her growing indictment. Obstruction of justice charges were piling up like snow in a blizzard. The vandalism started small, threatening messages spray-painted on my apartment door in red paint that looked like blood under streetlights. Federal fascists go home, and government thug in block letters that screamed mental breakdown. Security cameras captured everything in high-definition glory, adding destruction of property and intimidation charges to her expanding criminal resume. Community intimidation reached new levels of pathetic desperation. Legal threat letters sent to 34 homeowners who joined the Reform Coalition, all signed by lawyers who probably didn't know their client was using stolen money to pay their fees. Contractor harassment involved warning vendors not to work with troublemakers, turning basic home maintenance into political warfare that affected property values and family safety. The social media doxing campaign was particularly vicious. Dolores posted addresses, phone numbers, and fabricated safety warnings about families who opposed her reign of terror. Single mothers received anonymous calls claiming Child Protective Services had been contacted about unsafe living conditions. Elderly residents got Medicare fraud warnings based on complete fabrications designed to terrorize vulnerable people. But every move was being documented with federal precision that would make forensic accountants weep with joy. Surveillance equipment recorded license plates of her hired intimidators. Audio devices captured threatening conversations. Financial tracking revealed every illegal expenditure funding her psychological warfare campaign. Frank's military intelligence background proved invaluable when he discovered Dolores had hired private security to maintain 24-hour surveillance on my apartment. License plate traces revealed a firm with criminal history involving corporate espionage and witness intimidation. Actual criminals hired to harass a federal agent investigating crimes. The irony was so thick you could cut it with tactical knives. The financial desperation reached criminal heights when Dolores attempted to liquidate remaining HOA funds through fake emergency assessment bills sent to all homeowners. $1,800 per family for urgent infrastructure repairs that existed only in her increasingly delusional mind. When the bank questioned suspicious transaction patterns, she tried taking a $18,000 loan against HOA common property using forged board authorizations. The bank's fraud detection system flagged activity so obviously criminal that managers called federal investigators before freezing accounts. Financial institutions hate being used for money laundering, especially when the criminal is stupid enough to forge documents that wouldn't fool high school students. Janet's forensic investigation hit the jackpot when she discovered offshore accounts in 3 countries containing laundered HOA funds, earning tax-free interest while homeowners struggled with inflated fees. International wire transfers traced through shell companies in Delaware, accounts in Cayman Islands, and investment funds in Switzerland revealed money laundering operations that brought international banking regulators into prosecution coordination. The pressure cooker was building steam from every direction. Local TV investigative reports went viral with HOA president embezzles federal agent's vehicle headlines that made national news. State Housing Authority audits revealed regulatory violations spanning years. IRS Criminal Division liens destroyed Dolores's credit rating and froze personal assets. When her original lawyer withdrew representation citing irreconcilable ethical conflicts, the new attorney she hired specialized in white-collar defense and probably charged triple rates for clients facing federal racketeering charges. The retainer alone must have cost more than most people's annual salaries. Dolores was isolated, desperate, and making increasingly erratic decisions that would soon culminate in public meltdown spectacular enough to end careers and create federal precedents that would terrify property management criminals nationwide. Dolores's final descent into complete madness was spectacular to witness, like watching a luxury car crash in slow motion while classical music played in the background. Her public meltdown at the grocery store became neighborhood legend, screaming about federal conspiracies and government surveillance while wearing yesterday's clothes and reeking of wine at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. Other shoppers filmed her breakdown with smartphones, creating viral content that would haunt her forever. The smell of desperation and alcohol followed her like a toxic cloud as she ranted about deep state operatives infiltrating suburban communities. Checkout clerks backed away while she demanded to speak with managers about federal agents poisoning organic produce. Security footage captured her attempting to physically prevent mail delivery because government letters contained tracking devices, which constituted federal mail obstruction, another felony charge added to her growing collection. Her phone harassment escalated to psychotic levels, 23 calls to my federal office in one day, leaving rambling voicemails about constitutional violations and citizen militia resistance that made FBI behavioral analysts genuinely concerned about public safety. Each recorded message provided additional evidence of obstruction of justice, while revealing mental deterioration that would make prison psychiatrists busy for years. The final fraud attempt was breathtakingly audacious, creating fake board resolutions authorizing a $50,000 legal defense fund to fight government persecution. She forged 3 board members' signatures on bank documents with the artistic skill of a kindergartner practicing cursive writing. The bank's fraud detection system flagged forgeries so obvious they could have been spotted from space satellites. When she attempted to mortgage HOA common property without authorization, using signatures that wouldn't fool a notary public having vision problems, the bank contacted FBI financial crimes investigators before processing paperwork. Federal banking regulations don't tolerate mortgage fraud, especially when perpetrated by someone already under criminal investigation for money laundering. Community protection became my top priority as Dolores's behavior grew increasingly unhinged and potentially violent. Local police provided discreet patrols after Frank reported strange vehicles conducting surveillance. Federal marshals maintained invisible security around neighbors who'd supported the investigation. 6 different families filed restraining orders after receiving threatening communications that reeked of mental breakdown and legal desperation. The media circus exploded when local news coverage went viral with headlines like, HOA president steals federal agent's car, commits multiple felonies. National HOA abuse advocacy groups contacted me with offers of congressional testimony. Documentary filmmakers requested exclusive rights to adapt the story. Dolores's mugshot from her previous Arizona arrest surfaced online, revealing a pattern of criminal behavior spanning multiple states. Congressional staff began inquiring about federal HOA oversight gaps after news coverage reached Washington offices, where legislators love nothing more than highly publicized constituent services opportunities. The case was becoming a catalyst for national reform legislation that would protect homeowners from property management predators nationwide. Her final gambit was checking into a psychiatric facility claiming mental health defense, hoping to avoid criminal responsibility through therapeutic intervention. The expensive private clinic she chose specialized in white-collar criminals seeking reduced sentences through psychological mitigation, a strategy that rarely works with federal prosecutors who've seen every excuse imaginable. The new defense attorney she hired was a shark who specialized in hopeless cases and charged accordingly. His strategy involved negotiating plea deals that would minimize prison time in exchange for cooperation against other property management criminals. But federal prosecutors rejected initial overtures. Too many victims, too much evidence, too much media attention for lenient treatment. My final sting operation involved wearing federal recording equipment during our last confrontation. Dolores, desperate to justify her criminal behavior, admitted to financial crimes while trying to blame misunderstandings and administrative errors. She confessed to targeting Hispanic families because they don't understand American community standards, and elderly residents because they're too confused to complain effectively. The recording captured systematic discrimination admissions that made civil rights prosecutors literally applaud when they heard playback. Fair Housing Act violations with recorded confessions from the perpetrator's own mouth. Evidence so perfect it seemed scripted by legal television writers. Federal coordination reached military precision as U.S. Marshals collaborated with local SWAT teams for arrest coordination. IRS agents prepared asset seizure warrants for forfeiture proceedings. State agencies ready for professional license revocations that would prevent future property management employment. Victim services coordinators assigned for affected homeowners who'd suffered financial and emotional trauma. The trap was closing with mechanical precision that would make Swiss watchmakers jealous. Financial accounts frozen pending criminal charges. Property liens filed on Dolores's mansion for victim restitution. Professional licenses suspended across multiple states. Federal grand jury indictments sealed and ready for public announcement. 23 felony counts spanning wire fraud, mail fraud, civil rights violations, theft of government property, obstruction of federal investigations, money laundering, and racketeering charges. The prosecution would become a textbook case study for federal criminal justice courses and HOA reform advocacy nationwide. Dolores Crenshaw had transformed from suburban tyrant into federal criminal whose case would change laws protecting homeowners from property management predators. Her downfall would echo through legislative halls, courtrooms, and community centers where HOA abuse victims finally had precedent for fighting back against petty tyranny disguised as community standards. The public climax was approaching with theatrical timing that would satisfy every homeowner who'd ever faced bureaucratic bullying from power-drunk neighbors with clipboards and delusions of authority. The community center had never seen anything like this. Over 200 residents packed into folding chairs that creaked under the weight of 18 months of accumulated rage and anticipation. The smell of burnt coffee mixed with nervous sweat and the kind of electric tension that precedes historical moments. Local TV news crews positioned cameras while HOA reform bloggers live-streamed to audiences nationwide who'd been following our suburban David versus Goliath saga. I arrived in my fully restored Jeep, government markings now visible in all their official glory. Federal license plates catching fluorescent lights like badges of authority. The crowd turned as one, some supportive, others curious, all aware they were witnessing something unprecedented in suburban warfare history. Dolores entered like a condemned queen making her final appearance, flanked by her expensive white-collar defense attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. She wore her signature pearl necklace and that defiant expression of someone who still believed money and connections could overcome federal felony charges. The audience's collective intake of breath was audible when she took her seat at the defendant's table. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, standing slowly and reaching for my badge wallet, "before we discuss HOA vehicle policies, I need to clarify something that's been misunderstood for 18 months." The room fell silent except for camera shutters clicking like mechanical insects. I displayed my federal credentials, badge gleaming under harsh lights while cameras zoomed in for close-ups that would be replayed on news channels nationwide. "I'm Special Agent Marcus Steele, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, currently assigned to a federal task force investigating international wildlife trafficking operations." The collective gasp was so loud it probably registered on seismic equipment. Puzzle pieces clicked into place across faces as neighbors realized they'd been witnessing a federal investigation disguised as HOA drama. Frank the veteran saluted from his wheelchair. Mrs. Bennett clasped her hands together like she was praying for justice. "My vehicle contains classified communications equipment essential for tracking endangered species smugglers across multiple states. The unauthorized modifications Mrs. Crenshaw has been harassing me about are federal government property installed by U.S. taxpayers to protect wildlife from international criminal organizations." Dolores's face went through color changes that would have impressed chameleons. Red rage, white shock, green nausea, as she realized the magnitude of her federal crimes committed against a federal agent investigating federal crimes. Janet stepped forward with forensic evidence that made the audience lean forward like spectators at gladiator matches. Her PowerPoint presentation revealed financial crimes so extensive they required multiple charts: $147,000 embezzled through shell companies, fake vendor payments, international money laundering through Cayman Islands accounts, and personal luxury purchases funded by stolen homeowner fees. "The boat in her driveway," Janet announced with accountant precision that made numbers sound like weapons, "was purchased with money stolen from your HOA reserve fund. The BMW lease payments, vacation expenses, and credit card bills, all funded by fees you paid for community maintenance that never happened." Dolores's public meltdown exceeded all expectations for spectacular self-destruction. She leaped from her chair screaming entrapment and government harassment, while pointing accusatory fingers at anyone within reach. Her lawyer grabbed her arm, whispering urgent legal advice that she ignored completely. "He seduced me into this," she shrieked, which would have been hilarious if not pathetic, since our total social interaction involved declining her barbecue flirtation attempts. "This is discrimination against successful women who dare to maintain community standards." The crowd's reaction was swift and merciless: laughter, boos, and shouted responses that sounded like revolution brewing in folding chairs. Veterans stood at attention. Families who'd been harassed pointed fingers while cameras captured every moment of poetic justice unfolding in real time. U.S. Marshals entered on cue with timing so perfect it seemed choreographed by Hollywood directors. They read federal charges while Dolores continued screaming about constitutional violations and government persecution. 23 felony counts echoed through the community center like thunder: wire fraud, mail fraud, civil rights violations, theft of government property, obstruction of federal investigations, money laundering, racketeering. The handcuffs clicking shut provided the most satisfying sound effect in suburban history. Her perp walk through the crowd of victimized neighbors generated applause that lasted until she disappeared into the federal vehicle that would transport her to jail, where pearl necklaces weren't standard attire. Standing at the microphone with federal authority backing every word, I delivered the line that would be quoted in news articles nationwide. "Sometimes justice takes time, but it always comes for those who abuse power while forgetting that in America, no one is above the law. Not even HOA presidents who think pearl necklaces grant immunity from federal prosecution." The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes while cameras captured community catharsis that would inspire HOA reform movements nationwide. Children cheered because the mean lady was gone forever. Veterans saluted federal justice. Families embraced while sharing stories of harassment that finally had resolution through criminal prosecution. Frank's voice carried over the celebration. "This is what happens when communities stand together against tyranny, whether it wears military uniforms or pearl necklaces and drives a BMW." The immediate aftermath felt like Christmas morning mixed with election night victory parties. Dolores sat in federal detention without bail. Flight risk doesn't begin to describe someone with offshore accounts and international money laundering experience. Federal asset forfeiture recovered $189,000 for victim compensation, while new HOA board elections happened so fast they made democratic transitions look sluggish. The unanimous vote installed Maria Santos, the teacher, Robert Kim, the nurse, Frank, the veteran, and Janet, our forensic accountant hero. Their first official act was hosting a block party funded by recovered embezzlement money, complete with a federal barbecue tent that I provided through agency community outreach programs. The smell of legitimate grilling mixed with the sweet aroma of justice properly served. Legal consequences hit Dolores like an avalanche of federal fury. She pleaded guilty to avoid 20-year sentences, accepting 8 years in federal prison where pearl necklaces are considered contraband and BMW keys don't unlock cell doors. The $380,000 restitution order, triple damages under RICO statutes, would haunt her finances longer than her criminal record. Professional licenses permanently revoked across multiple states, ensuring she'd never again terrorize homeowners through property management positions. Civil rights lawsuit settlements added another $150,000 for families she'd discriminated against. Mrs. Bennett's cultural harassment, the Martinez family's ethnic targeting, disabled veteran Tom's accessibility persecution, all compensated through federal civil rights violations that made discrimination expensive enough to deter future predators. Community healing happened organically through transparent governance that felt revolutionary after 18 months of criminal dictatorship. HOA rules were rewritten with anti-discrimination clauses, monthly financial reports published online for homeowner review, and democratic participation encouraged rather than punished. The Marcus Steele Community Garden was established in common areas where Dolores once measured grass with tyrannical precision. Annual HOA Accountability Day became tradition, featuring speakers on homeowner rights, financial transparency workshops, and recognition ceremonies for neighbors who'd stood against abuse when speaking up required courage. The community transformed from fearful subjects into engaged citizens who understood that democracy requires active participation. Broader impact exceeded wildest expectations as our case became catalyst for nationwide reform. Colorado passed the HOA Reform Act, requiring financial audits, board transparency, and anti-discrimination protections. Federal legislation introduced in Congress mandated oversight mechanisms that would prevent future Dolores-style criminal enterprises disguised as community management. My congressional testimony about systematic HOA abuse patterns influenced national policy discussions while creating legal precedents cited in 23 federal civil rights cases. The Department of Justice published guidelines for investigating property management fraud that referenced our case as the gold standard for community-based federal prosecution. Personal growth came through community connections that federal work rarely provides. Janet and I discovered that shared passion for justice translates into relationship compatibility, especially when combined with mutual appreciation for precise financial documentation and federal law enforcement techniques. I decided to stay in Pinewood permanently, trading undercover assignments for community stability that felt like coming home. The Pinewood Community Justice Scholarship was established with recovered funds, providing $25,000 annually for law students studying civil rights advocacy. Frank managed the program with military efficiency while our first recipient, the undocumented student Dolores had tried to intimidate through discriminatory harassment, graduated magna cum laude from law school with specialization in housing discrimination defense. Media legacy included Netflix documentary, The HOA Files, How One Federal Agent Dismantled Suburban Tyranny, that inspired 47 similar investigations nationwide. Reform advocacy groups used our case for training materials while legal precedents protected vulnerable homeowners from property management predators who thought federal oversight didn't apply to suburban kingdoms. 1 year later, mysterious packages containing handwritten apologies arrived from federal prison. Dolores's letters, written on institutional stationery that smelled like disinfectant and regret, admitted to 15 years of HOA abuse across multiple states. Her confessions provided evidence for FBI investigations into nationwide property management fraud networks that victimized thousands of families. Today's Pinewood reflects transformation that proves communities can overcome tyranny through solidarity, documentation, and federal prosecution of criminals who mistake neighborhoods for personal empires. Property values increased 12% after removing criminal management, 0 discrimination complaints filed in 18 months. Community Garden produces 2,400 pounds of food annually for local food banks. National recognition as model for democratic HOA governance attracts visitors from communities facing similar abuse. Our success story proves that federal law enforcement and neighborhood organizing create powerful combinations when criminals mistake suburban settings for immunity from consequences. Share your HOA horror story in the comments. Documentation might help future federal cases. Subscribe for more justice stories where communities defeat tyranny and criminals learn that pearl necklaces don't grant immunity from handcuffs.
Thank you for tuning in to HOA Stories, where neighbors stand up against HOA Karens and karma comes a-knocking. If you like this story, hit that like button, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more HOA tales and real-life neighborhood drama each week.